In 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to this edition of the Committee on the Present Danger of China's webinar series on the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against the United States and, well, the free world more generally, but specifically our country, because after all, we are ultimately the most important impediment to the realization of the CCP's long-standing goal, namely world domination. And so unrestricted warfare, which began in the 1990s, they actually admitted to it in 1999 when two senior colonels of the People's Liberation Army published a book with the title Unrestricted Warfare, which was essentially a playbook for what the CCP was doing and has done relentlessly ever since, namely using every imaginable means of trying to attack this country short of explosive kinetic weaponry. So far, one must unfortunately include in that list of techniques that have been used to take us down chemical weapons in the form most prominently of fentanyl and biological weapons in the form of the COVID-19 virus. But there's also an array of economic warfare techniques and political warfare techniques and information warfare techniques and subversion and elite capture, most especially. In this series, which has now, I've lost count to be honest with you, but I think it's about 220 of these programs, has relentlessly documented to the best of our ability the Chinese tradecraft, if you will, of unrestricted warfare, the extent that they have wielded it against us successfully, and the cumulative effect it has had on our country, our society, our demographics, our military might, and therefore our ability to not only try to deter China from seeking its global governance, as Xi Jinping calls it, objectives, but actually defeating it if we must. Today's program is dedicated to an aspect of China's unrestricted warfare that is a bit more subtle than some of the other techniques. It is one that is being done, it appears, with an elite capture, not in the United States, but in Great Britain. As it happens, this is roughly the time that Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, for that matter, is actually in Beijing trying to craft a new strategic partnership with our mortal enemy, and that, frankly, of the people of Great Britain, namely the Chinese Communist Party. In furtherance of his new strategic partnership with Xi Jinping, the Starmer government has pursued an agreement with a nation on the east coast of Africa known as Mauritius. And it has struck a deal with the government of Mauritius. It's hard to overstate how really remarkably terrible a deal this is. The deal would surrender the sovereignty that Britain has exercised since, I believe, 1814 or thereabouts, over a group of islands in the Indian Ocean called the Chagos, about 1,200 miles from Mauritius. One of those islands is known as Diego Garcia. The technical difficulty. One of those islands is known as Diego Garcia, and since I believe the mid-1960s, the United States has had a base on Diego Garcia. Over time, it has built it into one of the most important overseas bases in the United States military. In the course of this program, we're going to be talking about the strategic importance of that base. We're going to be discussing the implications if that base were no longer available to the United States military, and specifically whether, if as a result of the deal that Keir Starmer's government has fashioned with Mauritius, a nation that is very close to the Chinese Communist Party, one of the most prominent of its Belt and Road Initiative partners, that base were not simply no longer available to the United States, but were to become like Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, another forward deployed power projection facility for the People's Liberation Army instead. We have an extraordinary group of contributors today. Most of them are with us via the miracle of videotape in the form of interviews that they've conducted with me in our program Securing America on Real America's Voice. With their permission, we have adapted them for the purpose of informing this particular discussion. We have two who are, however, with us live, and we're going to begin with one of them. His name is Jeff Nyquist. He is internationally, I think, renowned for his strategic analysis and his insights into developments that are shaping and, in some cases, dramatically reshaping the security of the United States of America. We talked with Jeff recently in connection with another of our allies who has similarly fashioned a strategic partnership of late with Communist China, and that would be the government in Canada. Here we have another of the so-called Five Eyes nations that is, I think it's fair to say, betraying our country, our alliance relationship. And we'll talk in the course of the program with one of our guests about the implications for the Five Eyes program as well. Let's start with Jeff Nyquist, a blogger, the author of The Origins of the Fourth World War, among other works, an essayist of great renown, as well as a very important member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us, especially on short notice. We are always appreciative of your time and your expertise, and particularly your thoughts about the strategic implications if this deal between Britain and Mauritius, in fact, is approved by the British Parliament and comes into force. The floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, one thought is the amount of money that the British are supposed to part with to renew this lease, to have this place for 99 years, for what is it, $41 billion? Is that the number?
Well, it's something like that, yes.
And Parliament might say no to this number. All the Western countries, you see what's happened to the price of gold, the price of silver, these are skyrocketing. This is a reflection of currency devaluation. I mean, everybody's massively indebted. There's been credit inflation. There is an economic crisis building in the West, as well as in Russia and China. But Russia and China have different kinds. They have what you would call socialist market economies. So they have different vulnerabilities. But here, this base in the Indian Ocean, it is one of the last outposts of the United Kingdom in the Indian Ocean, and it's strategically located so that you could use this base to interdict Chinese oil supplies from the Middle East, for example, and to protect Japanese oil resources, European oil resources shipped from the Middle East. The tankers that cannot go through the Suez Canal have to go around the Cape, and they're going to go past Diego Garcia. You also have it in an ideal position to help India if India gets into a war with China, to support India, to prevent India from becoming blockaded, which would be a strategy of China. China is already attempting to extend its naval presence in the Bay of Bengal through Burma if they could resolve the situation in Burma. So you have this base, and it's jointly, the British have bought it, have controlled it. It was part of the British Indian Ocean area. They had controlled it for a long time. They had expelled some decades ago Mauritians who had lived in the islands, and now this is where Mauritia has its claim on them. So the British are being very politically correct, sensitive here, but this is a really huge strategic issue because you have Europe dependent on these oil routes. This is just about the last base in the chain of bases that the West could use to protect, to cover those oil supplies. And you have the Chinese, by the way, positioning themselves at choke points, entry points of oceans, both below South America. There's some islands between South America and Antarctica the Chinese are moving into. You have stories I've heard from a journalist who went down to Africa, in the southern part of Africa, in Namibia, building a secret submarine base. You have the dependence of movement between these oceans for trade, the massive number of ships that go around the Horn, that go around the Cape, that can't use the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal, and that those places could be bombed or compromised during a large world war. So in terms of world war, communication between oceans is extremely important. It is in World War II, the British, better than anybody, being an island, were dependent on control of these oceans. If you want to know in World War II how this area was important, French Madagascar was controlled by Vichy France, and Churchill became alarmed because the Japanese might base ships or submarines out of Madagascar, or U-boats could operate out of there, and this was really endangering the sea route. So Churchill ordered the invasion of Madagascar. So the British invaded French Madagascar during the war because this is such a sensitive area. So the idea that this isn't important, no, it's very important on a number of levels. Look, one thing that could prevent China from going to war is a base right there, because they could say, look, they can interdict our oil, there's nothing we can do, so we can't go to war. This would be a way to prevent a war with China. So I leave you with those thoughts of the importance of this place.
Jeff Nyquist, thank you very much. Important scene setting. We're going to turn next to one of our very frequently featured guests, Sam Faddis, Charles Sam Faddis. Sam is a man who has had considerable experience in the national security arena, first as an Army officer. Then, after he took off that uniform, he went to work undercover without a uniform, serving as a spy for the Central Intelligence Agency. He knows the region of the first Bagram fiasco very well. He served for years on the Pakistani side of that border, trying to help our forces inside Afghanistan. And I asked him to address in an interview we did earlier today the possibility that what may come out of all of this is a, well, if you will, Bagram 2.0. He speaks initially about what it meant that we lost the first Bagram in Afghanistan to the Chinese Communist Party when Joe Biden surrendered the place, lock, stock, and barrel, I might add. And he ruminates with us a bit about what a second Bagram might result in as well. Let's go to the video with Sam Faddis from our Securing America interview. Now, I must say, Sam, you have in your storied career been an undercover operative in a lot of dangerous places. As I recall, Afghanistan and Pakistan were among them. There's a parallel situation to one that I know you have bemoaned, as have I, that involved the surrender with our abject abandoning of Afghanistan under the Biden administration of a critically important strategic facility known as Bagram Air Force Base in Afghanistan. I have an unsettled feeling of deja vu all over again, as Yogi Berra put it, with respect to an island far removed from there, but very, very important to American power projection throughout much of the other side of the world, namely Diego Garcia. The British government seems to be intent on giving it to Mauritius, which is a proxy, I guess you might say, of the Chinese Communist Party, which, as I recall, inherited Bagram when we left. Would this be a good idea, sir, with respect to Diego Garcia, any more than Bagram surrender was?
Yeah, I think we could call this safely a terrible idea. For the record, I spent my time in the Pak-Afghan theater on the Pakistani side of that mythical line that's up there in the mountains. I mean, look, Bagram was a Russian base that they built during their efforts in Afghanistan. And then we turned it into, if you will, the centerpiece of our effort in Afghanistan. We dramatically expanded it, not just building additional buildings, but all sorts of facilities and lengthening runways, which is critical, right? Because the bigger runways mean certain types of aircraft that couldn't fly into the smaller facility could now. We turned this into not just a facility with implications for Afghanistan, but a facility from which you could project power all over Central Asia and South Asia. And then making no effort to destroy anything, damage anything, render anything inoperable. We handed it over to the Taliban, who have now given it to the Chinese. And that has been the case now for, at least a couple of years, 3. So the Chinese now have access to and operate out of this facility that allows them to project power. So Diego Garcia is an island out in the Indian Ocean. Most people probably haven't heard of it, but it has served this kind of purpose, power projection, force projection for us for decades now. And this kind of thing is absolutely critical because, again, it's not about an airstrip or it's about pre-positioning fuel. It's about pre-positioning weapons, munitions, equipment, a heck of a lot closer to conflict areas than the East Coast or West Coast of the United States. And from there, aircraft that can fly thousands of miles and be refueled in the air can project power literally up into Iran and so forth. So this is an absolutely crucial facility. And now, if you hand it over to Mauritius, you might as well just have signed it over to Xi Jinping, right? So you're talking about handing this facility and all of that capability to the Communist Chinese. It is it's a place most folks have never heard of, but of immense strategic significance.
Yeah. And it goes without saying, I guess, that it would be a strategic victory for the Chinese Communist Party of the first order if, as with Bagram, they were not only able to deny us the use of this facility, but begin, as you said, projecting power from it as well. Sam, I don't know what to say except that we are looking at another example, it seems, of our so-called allies doing us wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, Five Eyes has been an institution for a long time. At least 3, and arguably 4 of those sets of eyes are now in enemy hands. Canada, Australia, Britain. They're all busily making strategic partnerships, it seems, with our mortal enemy and theirs, I would think, the Chinese Communist Party. What do you make of this? What's the future of Five Eyes, if anything?
Yeah, deeply problematic, right? I mean, you can't just set up these institutions and then say, this is now a fixture, and irrespective of results in reality, we're going to continue to be part of this. I mean, you would have to be looking at, let's start with the Brits, who are really the centerpiece of the whole thing from our perspective. You got to really look at their foreign policy, their internal policy, so forth at this point and think, does this continue to make sense? And even if it continues to make sense, are we really going to continue to share within Five Eyes? I mean, the basic idea of Five Eyes is essentially, it's an open book. Everybody's, almost sharing everything. That's the idea. Are we really comfortable with that anymore? I don't know. I would hope somebody's thinking about it.
I would hope so, too. Five Eyes, of course, is a reference to an intelligence sharing relationship institution, I think is what Sam just called it, that has been in place for quite some time among what are known as the Anglosphere nations. In addition to the ones we mentioned there, of course, the United States, Canada, Australia, Great Britain. There's also New Zealand. And I'm a little unclear, how shaky New Zealand's government is at the moment. It has been in the past, not so distant past, very much in the other camp. And I think there's still some of that lingering on. But we've literally seen what I think is truly betrayal on the part of certainly Canada and arguably in process now Great Britain. And as our friend Trevor Loudon has documented in his latest book, I believe, and certainly on successive programs of this series, Prime Minister Albanese of Australia is a communist, very closely tied to the Chinese Communist Party, and I think steering his country to alignment with them as well. The technical difficulties again. What we're going to turn to next is an assessment by one of our very impressive free-range thinkers, member of our Committee on the Present Danger China as well, a man who has for many years been actively involved both in private sector matters, thinking quite strategically, but also on the policy side, including for a stint as the policy advisor to the then governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, now the ambassador to Israel from the United States. His name is Rod Martin. In addition to his business acumen, he has been very, very clear-eyed in his thinking about national security policy and more generally public policy. And we asked him in the course of a program on, again, Securing America with Real America's Voice to talk a bit about how this present deal that the Brits are seeking to push through the Parliament in the United Kingdom bears on the position that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has taken with respect to another island, one much closer to our shores, and arguably of at least as important a strategic character as is Diego Garcia. And what that tells us about the importance of the United States owning such incredibly important strategic outposts. So Greenland and Diego Garcia are the topics that we asked Rod Mark to speak to, among other things, in the course of this interview. Let's get that video now.
This deal tells you exactly why Donald Trump wants ownership in Greenland, in whatever form that may end up taking. And it just couldn't more completely illustrate how things change unexpectedly over time. No one could have imagined that the British government would be this idiotic, including just about anybody in Great Britain. And my guess is, if they didn't have pretty tight parliamentary discipline, this would fail miserably in the Commons. But of course, they do. And Starmer is going to have to be persuaded not to do this. I can't imagine what's motivating him in the first place. Yeah, the Chagos Islands, as you know, are uninhabited. There were inhabitants at some point. The descendants of those inhabitants largely live in Mauritius or Great Britain. And they're pretty uniformly opposed to this transfer of the islands they're remotely connected to Mauritius. Mauritius has no historical claim on this. It's just silly. It's post-colonial thought taken to an absurd extreme. And it doesn't make any sense. Again, this is an uninhabited island chain that is sovereign territory of the United Kingdom. This base is subject to a 1966 treaty between us and the Brits, which appears to give us a veto over any such transfer anyway. But the net result of such a transfer is you have a country that is increasingly under Chinese sway in Mauritius that would be the landlord, not our landlord, Britain's landlord. And under this new deal, if Britain just chose to miss a lease payment, suddenly Diego Garcia is forfeit. Diego Garcia is essential to the United States military. It is the most important base we have in region. It's essential for B-2 bombers. It's essential for submarines on station. It's essential in countless ways. And to let this get away is extremely dangerous. But wait, letting Greenland get away would be even more so. And this almost certainly is a big part of what's driving Donald Trump's push to get sovereignty there. That's the absurdity in Greenland. We're going to defend their freedom to be a colony of Denmark? I mean, what is that?
Also probably 400 miles away.
Denmark has been a terrible colonial overlord. They were forcibly sterilizing Greenlander women as late as the 1990s. They're as bad as the Belgians in the Congo. It's absurd. And likewise here, Mauritius isn't a good place. That's not some place you'd want to be a part of. And of course, none of these Chagosians actually live in the Chagos. So their tie to this is somewhat remote. And yet, if you actually wanted to decolonize, the right answer would be create an independent Chagosian state and encourage these people to move back and give them some money to construct cities and stuff. But of course they're not going to do that. Of course they're going to do something absurd because, as you have rightly identified, Great Britain pretends to still be a free country and our closest ally. But under Keir Starmer, it is absolutely as far down the road to serfdom as you can get. It is a socialist state. It bans free speech and jury trials.
This is an important insight into both this question of owning what we need to secure ourselves and not relying on increasingly unreliable allies for such territories, and also how far advanced the rot is in Britain at the moment. And that doesn't even get into the question of the degree to which it is falling prey internally to Sharia supremacists. That's another day's work. But suffice it to say, Rod Martin, thank you for both of those important insights, and we will build on them in the remaining comments, I'm sure. I wanted to go next to, speaking of Britain, a Brit. His name is Robert Mitchley. He has had the distinction of having served as a communications advisor for not one, not two, not three, but 4 British prime ministers. He knows his way around the British political world, needless to say, and is a pretty proficient communicator as well. He is, at the moment, doing as a charitable work, I guess it's called, service as the spokesman for Friends of the British Overseas Territories, among which still are, thank God, the Chagos Islands, including Diego Garcia. I caught up with him for our television program recently. He is currently helping a delegation of people in the Friends of the British Overseas Territories group here in Washington, D.C., trying to convey to the Trump administration the magnitude of the strategic peril that is in prospect here, what is going on in Britain at the moment, and where this must now go with respect to clarifying the American government's position on these matters. We had a video of that conversation with him on Securing America the other day, edited for this purpose, and we're delighted to welcome Robert Mitchley through the miracle of videotape. Let's go to it now.
What's going on in the UK is this bill, which was raised almost a year ago now, looks to hand away Diego Garcia and the Chagos Islands and cede sovereignty to Mauritius. And, you know, Diego Garcia has one of the most critical bases in the world. It's a US military base. It has B-1 bombers there. It has ability to, cover East Africa, Afghanistan, Iraq, that whole area, but as well as being able to reach the South China Sea, which is going to be critical in the next 99 years. So this lease, I mean, it's absolutely bonkers from our behalf that what we're planning to do is we've held sovereignty over these islands for over 200 years since we defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. We've held this territory since 1814. The UK is looking to give away all these islands for free and then rent back Diego Garcia for 99 years using £46 billion. And I think that is absolutely outrageous. So, I mean, you've probably seen the clips with Trump saying, oh, the UK must need the money. No, we're not selling them. We're giving them away for free and in perpetuity. And now, basically, if the UK doesn't make that payment after a month, Mauritius can say, well, get off our sovereign territory then. Which means losing that whole territory, that entire most essential military base in the world, we will just lose it instantly and be asked to depart. I mean, at that point, I think the US would just have to, invade it or something. The president has woken up and said, this deal is terrible. So because he's woken up, because of this, the US has taken sort of a step back and said, oh, maybe we're not on board with this after all. And the UK is freaking out and said, we're going to sort of temporarily suspend the bill while we understand the Americans and understand if this is official, their official stance, that we then suspend it until we understand that we have got the US back on board. So this is currently suspended, but the Labour Party can bring this back at any moment to push it back through the Lords, and they're determined to give this territory away. They could use royal prerogative of the Parliament Act to just ignore the Lords and push it straight through. And that's a real danger that we're playing with right now. I'm not sure they will, because it's something that is very rarely used, and I don't think Labour consider this big enough to push it through. But I mean, we consider it big enough. They don't treasure it as much as we do. So that's a very last resort. So right now, this is kind of in the US hands, which is why we're here, because the US now control the power. There's a deal that was signed in 1966 that says that the US holds the keys on any changes to the treaty. And also there's another part to it that says it requires 2 years to make any changes to that treaty. Now obviously the Socialist Labour government is trying to force this through within a few weeks. And that is not 2 years. That's the current lease. That's not the treaty or the arrangement, that's the current lease. And they are also just renewed a lease a few years ago. I think it was 2020 they renewed a lease as well. But this is, the US sees this as so critical that lease will go over at 2036. It will be renewed without any second of a doubt. Look, what we need right now is the US to put in formal writing that this needs to be withdrawn. We need the State Department, we need people in the White House to put it into writing that they withdraw their support and this bill needs to be taken off the table completely. This is too much of a security threat. I found out yesterday that, Mauritius has now said that nuclear weapons are now not able to be stored on Diego Garcia. This is huge because this is part of the Pendalimdaba Treaty. And who is a co-signatory of that? It's China. China has said they've done an action plan to say that they want to inspect sites with potential nuclear weapons. That could mean China could be inspecting nuclear weapons on Diego Garcia. There's a second point to this, because if a war breaks out in the South China Sea, you can't depend on Guam, for example. You can't depend on military bases east of China because they are in range of Chinese missiles, but Diego Garcia isn't. And if you look at the B-1 bomber range, it's about 7,500 miles. Now, Diego Garcia is 3,800 miles from Taiwan, for example. So there's enough range for B-1 bombers to go there and back from Diego Garcia without being hit. This is really essential. So you've got the South China Sea aspect and you've got this inspection aspect as well. If that isn't enough for the US to turn around and say this deal is not compatible with the security of the world, then that needs to happen. Look, the president has said what he thinks, and then that's caused a domino effect into how this policy should change. So now we have the policy experts in the White House, we have the advisors who are holding the pen on this. Like I said, we need that formal letter to now go through to the UK government to say a formal withdrawal. So that is the next step.
Let me just make a point. What the president has said that Robert was alluding to there was vintage Trump. He said that what the Brits are doing here with this deal is an act of, quote, great stupidity, unquote. Now, that's not quite the same thing as a formal statement disengaging from this deal, but it sure should instruct what his administration is doing and saying about this. And as it happens, earlier this week, 80 members of a pretty impressive group of British and American political figures, national security practitioners, as well as the experts that are needed to help navigate through these kinds of issues, join forces to put out a public statement. You can go to presentdangerchina.org, the website of the Committee on the Present Danger of China, and see there the press release that they issued as well as the statement itself. It's very impressive, I think, and very forthright in both commending the president for describing this act of stupidity as such, but also calling upon him to take the next step, as Roberts just indicated, namely to formally tell the British government that we are not having this. It is not acceptable for the national security of the United States, nor, for that matter, for the special relationship, to the extent that it still operates between the United States and Great Britain. We're going to turn to a woman who was instrumental in that statement coming together, as she has been on so many fronts, including notably Pacific Islands, as well as this one in the Indian Ocean. Her name is Cleo Pascal. I believe she's a member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China. She certainly should be, and we consider her to be a binational treasure. She is a Canadian by birth, but she is very much attuned to and engaged in protecting the United States as well, because she understands full well that without us, not only is Canada toast, but so is the free world more generally. Cleo is a non-resident fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a columnist for the Sunday Guardian in India, and truly one of the duty experts worldwide on the strategic importance of these Indo-Pacific islands and what is afoot with respect to the Chinese Communist unrestricted warfare against them, which she words conjures up images of having once again, as we did in World War II, to have to liberate them at horrific cost to the men and perhaps some women of the United States military. We seek to avoid such a prospect, needless to say, and we're going to listen to a very important conversation that I had with Cleo Pascal on Real America's Voice earlier this week. Now, before we get into the drama that's taking place at the moment, both in London and in China for the moment, as well as here, let's level set a little bit on the importance of this speck of land in the wide ocean region known as the Indian Ocean. Diego Garcia, why is it of such strategic value? Let's start with you, Cleo.
Well, its location is pretty exemplary. It's an island that is surrounded by a lot of water, or else other uninhabited islands, which means that it's very difficult to get to. But from there, you can also see very far range. You can take a look at what's going on in the Middle East. You can take a look at Afghanistan. You can see what's coming into the Pacific Ocean, into the Indian Ocean. And its geographical features means that it has a port deep enough for an aircraft carrier. It can land strategic bombers. It can refuel nuclear submarines. So it really is the ideal base. You're on your own. It's very difficult to approach, but you can reach out and touch a lot of really bad parts of the world. So it seems like there's a very narrow group of Brits who are pushing for this. Keir Starmer and the coterie around him, and perhaps some civil servants. But even among his own Labour Party, you're starting to get at least one backbencher spoke up against it in the House, which is very uncommon. So it's not widely popular, and the more people learn about it, the more appalled they are. Even in the UK, it was originally presented as a kind of human rights thing, because the British forcibly and cruelly deported the Chagosians who were living on those islands in the end of the 60s and early 1970s in order to make way for the base, doing things like gassing their pets and cutting off medical support. I mean, it was really the way they did it was very, very different than the way the U.S. handled similarly strategically important islands in the Pacific with domestic populations. And the idea was, through international law, that the UK needed to decolonize the islands, but the agreement as presented does nothing for the Chagosian people. And in fact, the Chagosians in the UK, because many relocated to the UK and became British Chagosians, joined the UK military in some cases, they've come out with a government in exile, and the leader of the government in exile is eloquently and passionately saying that they want the island to stay British. They want the base to stay there. They want to resettle some of the other islands, and they want the right to perhaps work on the base if they're looking for employees. But the idea of being handed over to Mauritius is in fact a recolonization of their peoples.
How important do you think this open public statement by scores of prominent Brits and Americans might be in their deliberations?
Yeah, I think it might be quite important because I think the premise of the British government now, ratification of the treaty, is that this is a passing storm. Trump changes his mind when he was talking about Diego Garcia. He was really talking about Greenland. They're really trying to downplay it. But when you see the signatories on this letter, I mean, you've got retired admirals and generals and senior former National Security Council members, military planners. I mean, these are people who very rarely come out in public and make this kind of a statement. And all across the political spectrum, I think that the message will be sent loud and clear that this is not going away, and this has the potential to seriously affect the relationship. And it goes to what you're saying about raising concerns about Denmark. I mean, if you take a look at the national security strategy and how it raises questions about the future of Europe, Europe politically is not contained to Europe geographically. There are parts of Europe in the Indian Ocean, as you can see with the UK in Diego Garcia. France is in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean with Réunion and French Polynesia. They're even in Canada with St. Pierre and Miquelon, which is almost completely surrounded by Canada. And so if you're thinking about how going forward, a changing Europe might affect those little pieces of strategic geography, which currently we think of as outposts of freedom projection, becoming outposts of vulnerabilities, it really bears serious consideration. China's moving into Mauritius in the same way it moves into similar small, economically vulnerable countries with a rapacious elite. There's all sorts of concerns about money laundering, drugs, brothels with video cameras in them, the sort of targeted influence coercion campaigns that you would expect to see anywhere. And I think China has made it pretty clear that they want toeholds across the Indian Ocean. They tried in Sri Lanka, they tried it in the Maldives, they tried it in the Seychelles, and Mauritius is part of that laundry list, and it's pretty far advanced. The Indians, I think, thought they had a lot of control there, but I'm not so sure they have as much as they think they do. And anyway, we're talking about a 99-year lease.
99-year lease, which has in the fine print that if the Brits somehow manage to miss a payment, even by 1 month, the whole thing is a dead letter, and the arrangement with the United States would be as well.
I think that this has been really damaging for U.S.-UK relations. I've personally had a senior British official give me inaccurate information on this, and the members of the Trump administration who were manipulated or lied to will not forget it. This was a very, very bad decision on the part of the Starmer administration.
Yeah, perhaps endangering the very underpinnings of the special relationship. Well, as you could tell, that clip was part of a conversation, not only with Cleo Pascal, but also with Colonel Grant Newsham, United States Marine Corps retired, one of the most popular and certainly most indefatigable contributors to this series and so much more that we do with the Committee on the Present Danger of China, of which he is also a distinguished member. Grant has the distinction, in addition to all of that and his military background, of being a former Foreign Service officer in the United States Embassy in Tokyo. He has resided there and been active in business for decades in the region. He knows it as few others do, and he has pulled together his insights into the very real danger that we face, not only of the unrestricted warfare to which we've been subjected by the Chinese Communist Party for so long, but also the prospect of kinetic warfare next. It is the subject of his best-selling book, When China Attacks, a Warning to America. We are privileged to have had him contribute to that program. We're going to play his parts of the conversation next. And then we have a special treat in that he is actually going to be with us live for a little bit of Q&A with Jeff Nyquist. And I'm so grateful to him for all of these incredible contributions to the fight. Let's go to Grant's video now.
If this goes through, the Chinese would be able to eventually militarily and eventually politically dominate the Indian Ocean region. And they put the Indians in a very difficult position, but as a power projection platform, it's perfect for the Chinese to get. And I would also note from our perspective, this would be like losing Hawaii in terms of its military usefulness. So think of U.S. forces trying to defend, say, Taiwan or Japan and into the Pacific and not having Hawaiian bases. It's almost impossible to do. You'd have to go 8,000 miles almost to do just about anything. This is the only U.S. base in the Indian Ocean region, which does, as was noted, allow us to reach up into Iran if necessary, up into India and beyond to help them, to the east side of the Indian Ocean, to Africa. Without it, we have nothing. And it also serves as a linchpin between U.S. forces moving east to west around the globe. And there's no alternative to it. You cannot overstate the importance of it. To give that up voluntarily or to allow that to happen is insanity. And if the Chinese get, as they eventually will, find some part of the globe where they have not put their eyes on it and established a presence and an influence, if they get that, we have put ourselves and our friends in immense danger. And we have basically given up our hopes of having any influence in that region as well. Nuclear weapons are a tool that sometimes you have to have. But the problem is that because of the Palindaba Treaty that Mauritius has signed, that prohibits having nuclear weapons really on Diego Garcia. So what is going to happen immediately is the government of Mauritius is going to raise objections. They're going to be egged on by the Chinese to make it very difficult for the Americans to operate on this ground of nuclear weapons. So as soon as you sign the treaty, you're setting yourself up for this sort of legal nightmare that's coming your way, and that makes things very hard. But look at Hong Kong. The British promised the people of Hong Kong that they'd have 50 years of freedom and to have their own system. The Chinese strangled that. They broke the promise immediately. Yet the British had a handsome turnover ceremony with Prince Charles there and said everything's going to be great. Look at Hong Kong now. It's basically a prison. You go back further, Zimbabwe. The British government said the same thing. Trust us. Don't worry about what's coming. Don't worry about Mugabe. We've got everything sorted out. Within 2 years, Mugabe had murdered 20,000 Matabele tribesmen. And eventually, he looted the country and murdered any number of people and destroyed the place. The British government, after having said, trust us, why exactly would we trust them now over Mauritius? Their promise, I'm afraid, doesn't mean a whole lot. This would be an act of really defense suicide. If we go and let this happen, this is how serious this is. Think about losing Hawaii and then trying to defend the Pacific. You can't do it. Think about losing Diego Garcia and trying to operate down and defend our interest down in the Indian Ocean and our friends' interest. You can't do it. Why would you voluntarily give up just an excellent piece of real estate that has served very, very well? And it served very well when the president went after Iran last June. Was part of the plan. So this is something that needs attention, needs to be stopped. And we have to somehow get over this idea that all the British are our friends. There are British who do not like us and prefer the Chinese system. And so defend America.
Boy, there's some words to mull. This would be equivalent to losing Hawaii. It's just almost unimaginable that this would be an unforced, voluntary error of such epic proportions at the hands of, putatively, our most important ally, the other party in a special relationship. It may mark the transition in unmistakable terms from one camp to the other of the hard-left British government if it goes through. We pray it won't. But to discuss further the possibilities that it will and what the United States should be doing under these circumstances, I'm delighted to welcome back Colonel Grant Newsham in the flesh, as they say, as well as our friend Jeff Nyquist, J.R. Nyquist, to participate in a little bit of Q&A as we wrap up the program. Gentlemen, again, thank you for your very important contributions to our calibration of this idea that is potentially, according to Robert Dishley, possibly going to be blown through the parliament at any moment. If you had the ear of the President of the United States, and Jeff, let me start with you, what might you say to him at this moment about Diego Garcia?
Well, obviously, this negotiation is a British matter, and of course, we can tell the British what we would like, but it's their decision to do this. So we have to be careful not to say anything that will make the situation worse. So that would be my advice to him, because the president has said things, I think, that have pushed our allies to taking a sort of a negative view of us, and that has resulted, I think, in an election of a leftist in Australia and in Canada. We've got a leftist in the UK as well, in Keir Starmer. This is a very difficult position for the United States, to have people so far on the left in charge of these countries. So how we get through this period, I think what we need to do is make ourselves look as attractive as possible, so maybe the right will be elected in those countries. That would require a kind of subtle thought of how we would present ourselves. I think that's been lacking in the administration so far. But the importance of Diego Garcia to us as joint operators out of that base has to be underscored. And I don't know what the mood is in Parliament right now, but I can only bet that they are politically correct because of the party in power, that they feel guilt about colonialism, and maybe if we were able to talk about this in a way that was certainly honest, but more strategically focused, we could get them to have that focus rather than a politically correct focus.
Jeff, thank you. Colonel, if you had a moment with the president, what would you say?
I tell them, you've got to stop this. You don't want to be remembered as the guy who gave up the Indian Ocean equivalent of Hawaiian bases. It has to be done carefully, as you just heard. We got ourselves into a fix here because the State Department did actually issue an announcement last year saying that they were all on board with the deal, that it had been an interagency review and this was a good deal. And Mr. Trump even said he approved of it as well. This was in the early stages of the Trump administration, when they were getting their feet, sort of getting their balance. It's really an inexplicable mistake that they made, because now you have to kind of crawl back from that. And how someone just, I would like to think we can come up with the language that works, and get across to the British that they cannot do this, and that also they were not entirely forthcoming about this. This was a bit like a real estate person selling a house and not telling about the flaws in the house. Trying to, you've only got a few minutes, you got to sign the thing. Well, they were not as transparent as they should have been. Their proposal actually violates certainly the intent of that treaty that we made in 1966 with the British. But they are what you're dealing with in this British government. These are ideologues. They're woke. They're at heart, they're anti-American, and they despise Donald Trump. So they are going to keep trying to get this through, and it just can't be done. But it's up to the president. If he could, figure out a way to send the Iranian General Soleimani to the next world and grab Maduro from Venezuela recently, I think he's probably got some brain power on his side who can come up with the right language for this. But this isn't something that you can just sort of let it go and say, well, we have other issues, we have bigger interests. This is about as fundamental as you get if it's U.S. Power projection that you're interested in, but also not ceding the Indian Ocean to the Chinese.
Yes. Colonel, and I think what you've just emphasized, and by the way, it was, I think, baked into the letter that I mentioned a moment ago, this public statement. from the 80. You and I were both among the signatories, and of course, Cleo and a number of others in our circle, Jim Fennell among them. Having previously formally indicated the United States government was going to be on board with this, I think that's why Robert Michelet and others are making the point that we have to have an equally formal renunciation of that position. And I don't disagree with what you and Jeff both said about needing to do it skillfully, but I think it has to be done rather forcefully as well, because, as you said, Colonel, we are dealing with ideologues who are determined, if they can, to, well, not just deliver this serious strategic blow to the United States, but also to empower their friends in communist China. And it might be also noted, and I'd be interested in your respective comments about this, the British government has, in just the past week or two, as I recall, done another big gesture to the Chinese Communist Party, presumably in the run-up to this new strategic partnership negotiation, and that is to have given them prime downtown real estate on a massive scale in London. I mean, literally a block or two from Tower Bridge, and they are going to put there, I think, the largest embassy China has. And among other things, it's been pointed out, it is in close proximity to a very sensitive facility of the British government, through which run underground some of the most sensitive cables in the country, used to, among other things, transmit intelligence, I suspect, including some of ours through the Five Eyes channel. Colonel, I mean, again, this isn't happening in isolation, but it is happening at a moment when the challenges that are associated with our relationship with the British government are far beyond just what's happening in the Indian Ocean, are they not?
No, that's right. And keep in mind, of course, that there's plenty of British people who are horrified by this. If you had a different administration, this presumably wouldn't be happening. It probably wouldn't be, particularly now that attention's been focused on the issue. But you're right, the Starmer government gave the Chinese this massive embassy in central London, and it's not just an intelligence gathering platform and a place from which to send out people to subvert, as they've been doing very well for decades, but it's also a sign of dominance, that the British government lacks the nerve to stand up to the Chinese. Diego Garcia, it's something else. You got to ask, is there something more going on? Is there an affinity for the Chinese governing model? There probably is, and a dislike of the United States, as I mentioned, and a desire to bring down America's strategic position. And also, there's probably some pretty sort of old-fashioned corruption going on, given that Mauritius's lead negotiator is a friend of the Prime Minister of Britain. $35 billion is a lot of money to get a little cut off as well. But this is, I think, it is a deliberate attempt by the British government. And lastly, just as we've seen, that Prime Minister Starmer was in Beijing just the other day. He may still be there. And watch the clips of him coming off the plane. Look at him reviewing the troops. If there was ever more humiliation meted out on a foreign leader in the last 200 years by the Chinese, I haven't heard of it. Just look at these things. It is absolute submission by the PRC to the Chinese Communist Party. And I don't think that it's just Donald Trump is the reason. It's the reason. I think this goes far beyond Mr. Trump. He's just a convenient excuse.
The symbology, though, as you say, Grant, is powerful because of the long and troubled history of these two nations. That act of submission arguably started in earnest with the surrender of Hong Kong. I was there for that, and the humiliation was palpable. Make no mistake about it, and I think it's gotten worse with the passage of time. But Jeff, let me just ask you about this, because you study these things closely, and what the Chinese are doing, it seems, rather assiduously, is trying to destroy, well, obviously their objective is ultimately to destroy us, but to destroy these alliance relationships. And you've warned that the president may have played into that to some extent, but what are your thoughts about the progress that they've been making in doing just that, particularly with the Five Eyes, but perhaps others as well? South Korea comes to mind.
The divide and conquer game is definitely a serious one. They do that within our country. They think they're doing it within places like Germany and the UK. The left-right divide is one that they want to see widen. Mm-hmm. They don't want to see Western societies united. They don't want to see NATO united. And they certainly don't want us to have a coherent defense structure. This is something that you see with the Russians and Chinese cooperating together. Their allies in Latin America and in Asia and Africa. They're creating their own alliance system to counter ours. And of course, if they can create trouble for us in bases, vital bases we have, having us, I mean, if the UK is to spend 101 pounds a year paying a lease for 99 years on Diego Garcia, it's you know, less that they can spend on weapons, right, or training or something else. And if this country that supposedly holds the lease has heavy Chinese influence in it, as well as the influence in China, they can engineer what the Russians call a scissors strategy, where they can create conflict from both sides by paying people, by using corruption and financial influence. They can create issues. And I think we've seen that in other areas. So I think that if people think strategically about all these things, domestic and foreign policy, we have to think our unity is a strategic plus, and our disunity is a strategic plus for our enemies. So if we thought in those terms, I think we would be a lot more careful in how we frame our discussions, because the left, they've got this, as Grant has just pointed out, they've got this political correctness that paints us as bully imperialists and racists. We need to talk over that and past that about the survival of our countries, respectively, and all the people in those countries, whether they're left or right. We all have a stake in this. And that's how we should frame it, because I think that a lot of things on the left that are really crazy, if you get strategic common sense, they will start backing away from it when they see what it means.
Well, I'd like to think so. I'm not sure that's much in evidence at the moment. And by the way, I might just add that from that interview with Sam Faddis, we took the part relevant to today's topic. But if you are interested in what the Chinese Communist Party and its friends are up to inside our country, Sam had some powerful insights into what's going on in places like Minneapolis at the moment, among others. These captured elites and their funding sources and their organizational efforts to divide us, Jeff, just as you say, to conquer us if they can, without fighting. And that remains, I think, an objective, but they certainly are creating, as we've discussed on these programs on many an occasion, giving themselves the option to engage in the old-fashioned kind of warfare, not just the unrestricted pre-kinetic kind, but the shooting kind as well. We're going to leave it at that for today. I urge every one of you to please take a look at the powerful public statement of these 80 experts and previous officials in both parties, that is to say the United States and Britain, and take to heart the admonition to urge the president to make a formal statement demanding that Britain retain sovereign control over the islands of the Chagos and specifically Diego Garcia. And I would simply add that if they're not going to do it, we must. I look forward to our next visit with you all. Thank you for joining us for this one. Please make sure that this video is made available to your friends and colleagues and others in your circles of influence, especially as we urgently need their help as well in pressing upon President Trump and his subordinates the importance of not losing what Grant Newsom has described as the equivalent of Hawaii to the Chinese Communist Party. Save Diego Garcia. God bless you all. God save America. We'll talk with you the next time. Over and out.